Kellen Winslow Jr., a former NFL star who actually has just been convicted of rape. He's just been found guilty last week, actually, in a trial, convicted of raping a 58-year-old woman. And his trial has been national news. A lot of people are talking about it, but something happened during the jury deliberations that got us talking kind of behind the scenes here at the Damage Report. One member of the jury sent over a note to the judge, and I think we have those notes, in an attempt to clear up some confusion. If we could show you those notes. These are just a couple questions that the jury sent over. At the top of it, you can see it says the jurors could benefit from an explanation as to what being under oath means. The second part says, additionally, how we should follow the law and not what we think the law should mean. So these are two, pretty incredibly important questions that, we've gotten really far in the trial to be confused about. And we were talking about this a lot, behind the scenes. And so we actually are gonna have a conversation about the justice system and aspects of what happens behind the scenes with the jury that many of us don't really know much about. So we're gonna bring in Janika White. She's a trial attorney based in Memphis, Tennessee. Good morning or afternoon for you, right, Janika?
Afternoon here, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I have a lot of questions. Let's just jump right into it. How often would you say jurors are maybe confused about their jobs at trial?
Well, I think that absolutely depends on the attorneys as well as the judge. I'm sure jurors are confused, but that's why it's important for attorneys to almost act as not only advocates, but also teachers. Going in a trial, we always know you're dealing with lay people. They're not attorneys. They don't talk like we talk. So it's important to be able to relate to the jury, but while you're relating to the jury and advocating for your client, that you're also explaining terms that a layperson may not know. When I speak to a jury, I speak to them just as if I'm talking to my family at a dinner table or a friend during a phone conversation. I don't overcomplicate things, and I make sure that I'm walking them step by step as to the meaning of terms that they may not know, as well as making sure that they understand the law. But that's an important thing for the judge to do as well, because the judge explains the law in what's called jury instructions. The unfortunate, part about that is that jurors don't get jury instructions until the end of the trial after they've already heard all the evidence.
Which is kind of shocking, right?
That seems a little bit bizarre because along the way, they're gonna be interpreting what they hear, the questioning, all of that, based on what their understanding of what they're supposed to be doing is. Do we actually think that people can sort of go back after the fact and reevaluate based on these new instructions?
Well, the instructions that are given at the end of the trial are more so explaining the law and going through what they've learned and how they should be applying what they've learned during the trial. At the beginning of a trial, you have voir dire, some attorneys call it voir dire, and that is where the attorneys question potential jurors and pick a jury. During that process, there is an opportunity for the judge as well as the attorneys to somewhat explain some terms of law, but that also occurs in opening statement. But opening statement is done solely by the attorneys, of course. So that's why it's very important for an attorney during an opening statement to make sure that he or she lays out the standard of proof, whether it's preponderance of the evidence, whether it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and to go through and explain terms and things that the jurors may hear during the trial that they deem to be important. That's why it's crucial to include those kinds of terms in opening statement, because after that point, an attorney does not have an opportunity to really speak directly to the jury again until the end of the trial during closing argument.
All right, we've been talking a lot about the new television show, the new series on Netflix, When They See Us, documenting the Central Park Five and what happened to them. And there's a woman who's been getting a lot of backlash, one of the prosecutors, Linda Fairstein. She's been, she kind of became famous after this trial. She oversaw the interrogations, and she's essentially, I guess you could say she's been like blacklisted or canceled, lost her publishing deal, her agent has dropped her. What do you think about what's happening to her?
I can't speak necessarily about what's happening to her because I've not watched the documentary yet. I have a case now that we're dealing with in Memphis that's very similar to that. So I don't know. I've not watched it yet. But what I will say is that we're seeing more and more, even some districts that have sections devoted solely to going back through cases to make sure that the wrong person was not convicted of a crime. Unfortunately, it's something that happens. I honestly don't know the statistics as to how often that happens, but that's why it's so important to have honest, ethical prosecutors who are actually going to actually present the facts. And unfortunately, here and again, we have prosecutors who are accused of misconduct.
It isn't. So don't you have a plan for state lawmakers in Tennessee as far as questioning juveniles?
I do. Based on the recent case that I was just speaking of that we have here in Memphis, that was brought to my attention, that I've gotten involved with along with another attorney. I am proposing to state legislatures here in Tennessee to pass a law that juveniles cannot be questioned without an attorney. Here now, as long as the parent waives that right, they can proceed with questioning a child. And I don't even think that parents should be allowed to, one, waive the right, and children still should not be questioned even with a parent. A child should be questioned with an attorney. Here in Tennessee, if I settle a civil case, for instance, a child that was in a car accident, I have to go to court and get that settlement approved by a judge. And that's simply because that doesn't mean that the mom or dad may not be acting in the best interest of the child. They just may not know the law. So they don't know whether or not that settlement is fair. And I believe the same concept applies when you're talking about a child's rights. Their rights when you're talking about them being potentially charged with a crime. It's extremely important that they have representation, not by a parent, but by an attorney.
We saw that in When They See Us. We saw that in Making a Murderer, just like two big publicized situations where the kids their parents waived their rights to an attorney. I think 4 of the 5 in When They See Us.
Yeah, unfortunately, they trust authority figures that aren't necessarily acting in their best interests.
Janika, thanks so much for being with us. I wish we had much more time, but thank you for being with us. We were shocked by that question, and it seems like you're not. What does under oath mean? It didn't shock you.
It's not that I'm shocked by the question. It's just that it's really important for attorneys to do their due diligence during voir dire in questioning the jurors to find out their level of education, asking questions like what shows do they watch. So it's all about, it has a lot to do with attorneys. The attorneys have to, they pick the jury. And sometimes you do get jurors that you may not want on your jury because the other side gets to choose too. And you have what's called preemptory strikes where you can strike, and you have strikes where you can strike for cause. But that's why it's so important when picking the jury that you're picking a jury that you think can follow and understand the law. But it's even more important that an attorney make sure that he or she is going through and explaining these terms.
All right. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for having me.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.